Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about a conversation I had, and rather than insulting this person, I'm just going to make a video about it because it's something that if clearly people don't understand this, it's a problem. So if you're here on this channel and you're trying to get really strong, this is a problem if you don't understand this. And the person tried to claim that number one, you won't get stronger from a powerlifting type squat than you will from an Olympic squat, which is patently false. The power squat uses more muscles. Okay, and that should be one of the dead giveaways. Use more muscle in a power squat. Now, keeping in mind, I'm promoting the box squat while saying this. This discussion was about me discussing the wide stance box squat. The entirety of the conversation. But it is a power style squat. We're talking about a wide stance, knees out, using more muscle mass than a narrow stance. Okay, well understood. That is why powerlifters use that stance. Olympic lifters use the stance they do because it's really hard to do a power clean out in a sumo type stance, right? It's very hard to power clean or do a snatch with an ultra wide stance for most people. They use a shoulder width stance. Now there are exceptions, and I could be largely wrong. Who knows? I don't watch the Olympics these days, but it's a narrower stance squat, right? And that's why they do the narrow stance front squat and everything else. They're looking for sport specificity. They're not necessarily trying to build the most strength and muscle. Okay? Because they don't need to be able to squat more than they're going to clean. It's nice, but it may not necessarily be specific to their goals. And what do I mean be strong enough? Well, to build as much muscle mass. Okay? They have weight classes. Olympic lifting is truly about getting its technically proficient as their movements as possible without gaining too much body weight, which means they want to limit total muscle mass. They want muscle, but they don't want it in the wrong places. They don't want to put muscle on you somewhere that's not going to carry over to their specific lifts, because all muscle makes you stronger. But let's come over to that point. The argument the person made was that it won't make you stronger, that it doesn't carry over. We'll get to that in a minute. But one of their arguments was a stimulus to fatigue, and they tried to use the good morning versus a Romanian deadlift example. Like, well, it's harder to recover from a wider stance squat because you use more weight. You don't know how we train the wide stance box squat then. You have no clue. You clearly don't watch my channel. You don't watch my own training vlogs or anything I say about the lift. Okay? Because it's very obvious that's not what's happening. Look at all the speed work. It's mostly speed work. And yes, I have built a 550 back squat using basically speed work on a box. Of course, and you guys will see me through here do 515 on a box with chains added. But that's 500 there. But let's come over to the point. He's talking about the stimulus to fatigue. Well, no. In this case, we're lifting more weight because we're involving more muscle mass. I want that to be very, very clear. Wider stance squatting does two things. Number one, obviously, which should be the most obvious, is that it brings the bar back. Right? We keep the bar midfoot on most of our big standing exercises. That's the goal. If your feet are further out, you've brought in your midfoot closer to your center of gravity. Right? Common sense. Look at a triangle. It's understood. Well, that means the bar path is slightly further back. It's a couple inches further back. That means your torso angle is slightly more upright. We have slightly less shear on the spine. Okay? It's easier to keep it upright because the bar path is further back. Well, in theory, that will, in some cases, help with recovery. Right? That'll help with recovery. The argument being, of course, well, there's more weight on the bar, so more axial loading. Well, maybe if you're doing all-out sets of 5, you're doing a 5x5, maybe that's a problem. That's not how we train these movements. And when I say we, I mean people who use the system of training I use and promote. So when people come in and they argue, I want people to understand my arguments are from the context of how I train my clients, how I promote people training. That is the context in which we are arguing. Everything is context dependent. All right? I don't have advanced lifters doing heavy 5x5s on a power squat. We're doing speed boxes with a power squat. Axial loading is not a problem. And we're not worried about axial loading on our 1 rep max day every 2 weeks when we hit a max squat. Yeah, the axial loading is going to be high, especially with the bands and chains. Of course it is. But again, he's making that argument, but the point is that we're using more muscle, and it's not like when we talk about the Romanian deadlift versus the good morning. You can recover better from the same amount of posterior chain stimulation on a good morning versus a Romanian deadlift with a much, much lighter weight. But it's not just 50 pounds difference off of a 500-pound squat, right? Because if you're a 550 power squatter, you can easily walk in and Olympic squat 500 pounds, right? Right? This is understood. Anybody not understand that? Okay. Talking about like 10% difference. There's a lot more than 10% difference on a good morning versus a Romanian deadlift, and it has to do purely with the moment arms. It's the amount of shear being placed on the spine. So that's why it's harder to recover from an RDL than a good morning. Well, there's less shear on the spine with a wide stance squat than a narrow stance squat. It's not a lot of difference, but it's less. So actually, if that's the point we're arguing, is the person really tried to compare it that way, those two lifts? Well, no, you'd be wrong. The power squat would be like the good morning in that regard. It's less shear on the spine. It's not much difference. But again, we're talking about foot placement, not bar placement. I think people forget we can power squat with a high bar. I do. Pretty common. So, what's going on here? What else is going on? We work more muscles. It's mostly hip. It's adductor and abductor. Okay, that's what's being worked a lot more with a wide stance. You are bringing way more hip and groin into the lift. A lot more. Enough that, again, it turns a 500 into a 550 if you're proficient at it. Okay, you get 50 pounds out of it. If not more. A really strong guy might get 100 pounds. That would be the rarity. So the person is not understanding that. Because it involves more muscles in the low body, we get more strength out of it. Now, some people say, well, why don't Olympic lifters use it? Because they have a weight class. Maybe they don't want bigger hip muscles. Maybe they don't want a bigger groin. If they don't need a bigger groin, and they can just keep their squat quad dominant, even if they're a lot weaker, maybe that's what they care about. You don't see them training their biceps either, do you? Why? Well, the biceps would add weight. And they don't really help with their lifts, not once they're technically proficient. They do if you muscle this stuff up the way a lot of us would do as other types of athletes. So let's come over and talk about what's going on. You're getting more strength out of the power squat because you're involving more muscles in the low body. And if you only shoulder width squat, you're going to have muscle deficiencies in your low body. Okay? I want that to be very, very clear. Now, someone will also try to claim what doesn't carry over. It has a full carryover. And I think that was beautifully said by Louis Simmons. He said it many times. You can find many lectures of him explaining this when people talk about the Olympic squat versus what his guys do. And he tells them, he's like, okay, well, how many guys out there? There's plenty of guys who can Olympic squat 400 pounds. He goes, but like an Olympic 500-pound squat would be considered quite difficult. Plenty of guys can do that also, but it's considered to be, quite difficult. For the record, I Olympic squat over 500 pounds, by the way. You guys have seen it. But I digress. He pointed that out, and he's like, but he goes, all of my guys can squat at my gym because I have over a dozen guys who can squat 800 pounds. Okay, they can all squat 800 pounds. They don't practice the Olympic squat at all. We don't use it. It's like I can take any one of those 12 guys right now who can power squat 800, and I can put 500 pounds on their back, and without practicing the lift, they can Olympic squat 500 easily like it's nothing. So building that 800-pound power squat gives them the easy ability to just easily smoke 500 on an Olympic squat. They don't do the Olympic squat. But he's like, how many 500-pound Olympic squatters who've coached at a weightlifting gym and trained there can come in and power squat 800? Almost none of them. Okay? He's got a point. And it's because it carries over. All right. The wide stance squat builds more muscle. Just because you remove those muscles doesn't mean that you're not good at the exercise that uses less muscle. You still have those muscles built also. Okay? Anything people don't grasp there, the quads get worked the same. That has been confirmed with studies as of recently. Wide stance squatting works the quads just as much as a narrow stance. The narrow stance does not work the adductors and the abductors and all of those muscles as well as the wide stance. In other words, you get more strength on the wide stance, and yes, it will carry over. It's been proven repeatedly. Tons of wide stance power squatters who are stronger on the power squat than people who practice the Olympic lift can still come in and smoke the Olympic lifters on the Olympic squat. Okay? Very common. Alright guys, well that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.